Hello Internet, I am an idiot and this is a movie review. Now it's been a little while since I've made a video and even longer since I've made a movie review, but it's never too late to jump back into the game. Recently, I've been watching a lot of disaster films, and most of them take a number of liberties with reality to present us with a spectacle of destruction. I imagine most people do not go into a disaster film expecting a great story, but suspension of disbelief can only carry so much weight if the film fails to be consistent. This is The Day After Tomorrow. The Day After Tomorrow came out in 2004 under the direction of Roland Emmerich, who also helped write the film. Since I'm a fan of disaster films, I can let a lot of nonsense fly for the sake of wanton destruction. But this film is special. Very, very special. Let's just dive right into this bad boy, shall we? The film opens up with us flying over the Arctic, with the credits also flying over, leaving a neat little reflection on the ice and water. I'm always a fan of films that use their credits to hint at what is to be expected in the film. The only thing that these credits hint at is the expense that this film cost, a whopping $125 million. When the credits finish on the man himself, Roland Emmerich, we see a small camp resting on the ice. I'd say these are the main actors of the film, but since Roland likes to have an enormous cast of poorly written characters in his films, this isn't exactly true. Here we see Frank Harris showing Jason Evans, played by Jay Sanders and Dash Mihawk, respectively, how to drill for glacial cores in the ice.
Boss will chew my head off if these cores get messed up.
Clearly Frank is doubtful of Jason's abilities. Why he was brought along if he's too dumb to operate the equipment? I don't know. Apparently he's the navigator. Frank leaves Jason to drill and brings back the cores to Jack Hall, played by Dennis Quaid, and apparently, Jack is also doubtful of Jason's abilities.
You let Jason operate the drill?
Alright, so Jason is the dumbass of the group, which sets up a bit of humor when the ice starts to crack.
I didn't do anything.
Ha ha, he knows they're gonna blame him for something that he's physically incapable of causing. The ice breaks further, causing the drill to get lost in what can only be described as a bottomless crevasse. Now, since Jack is clearly a smart guy, he'll remember that he had several cores already stored and won't worry about the remaining cores on the other side of the crack. Alright, maybe not. Maybe Jack is dumber than Jason. Well, now that the crack is wider and he barely made it over that jump, he's gonna go look for a narrower section to jump back, or maybe they'll throw him a rope to tie around his waist just in case, right? Oh, okay. Well, at least he's lucky. Wow! He died rather early for being the first name on the credits list. Roland Emmerich must be taking plays out of Wes Craven's playbook of hiring a big-name actor to attract audiences, only to kill him off a few minutes later. I'm impressed. What? I mean, what? You can clearly see that pick hanging off his hip prior to the jump, and yet he's able to get it out fast enough to be able to use it? Seriously? We're only 5 minutes into the film and it's already not making any sense. That's a bad sign. Anyway, they get Jack out of the crack and the film cuts to New Delhi, where Jack is giving a speech on global warming. It's a bunch of back and forth that can be broken down like this. This theory is sensationalized and too expensive. I'm smarter than you and you should listen to me. I'm not going to listen to you because I'm the bad guy. Well, I'm the good guy and I'm going to talk down to you, Mr. Bad Guy. The conference ends and we're introduced to the only decent character in the film, Terry Rapson, played by Ian Holm. Okay, that's not entirely true. He's as poorly written as any other character in this film, but this is Ian Holm we're talking about. Ian can make even the shittiest character come to life. The trouble with this scene is, it's completely pointless. Jack and Terry are going to go have some tea and a conversation, but the film never actually shows us the conversation. Instead, we cut to the Headland Climate Research Centre in Scotland, which Roland has conveniently put on the screen for us. Get used to having the location spelled out for you. Roland Emmerich has no confidence in his audience to be able to figure out where the set locations are, and he's not a clever enough filmmaker to leave hints within the scene itself. Here we are introduced to two more pointless characters, Dennis and Simon, played by Richard McMillan and Adrian Lester respectively. They're two researchers who notice that a buoy in the Atlantic Ocean that measures ocean temperature has registered a 13-degree drop. Impossible? Yes. Important? I guess. More important than these two characters anyway. The film then cuts to Tokyo. Thank you, Roland. I would not have been able to figure that out for myself. I mean, you've got the Japanese characters on the signs, you've got the Japanese language being shouted out on the loudspeaker, you have Japanese people wandering around on the street, and of course you've got the random citizen drinking sake. Who knows, I might have thought this was Russia. Anyway, this scene is one of many early scenes establishing that something is amiss with the weather. These kind of scenes would help build tension if the poster of the film weren't the Statue of Liberty being covered in ice and snow up to its fucking wrist. Instead, they're cheap appetizers for the visual spectacle that is to come. The film cuts back to Jack Hall returning home to dead plants and foreboding mail.
I just saw that Sam got an F in calculus.
Oh no! An F in calculus? What a fucking tragedy! I hope some global disaster doesn't come along and cause this scene to be entirely pointless. Oh wait, this scene is what I like to call character padding. In most films you get character development, but in a Roland Emmerich film, you get character padding. This is mainly caused by the bulk of the actors knowing they're in a Roland Emmerich film, so they don't really care about their performances. They know the audience is coming to see destruction, thus their A-game is not required. In this padding scene, we're introduced to Lucy Hall and Sam Hall, played by Sella Ward and Jake Gyllenhaal. Sella Ward puts on a decent performance as a caring doctor and mother, while Jake Gyllenhaal looks like he couldn't give a fuck about any of it. Sam Hall is a boring character whose most notable traits are he's afraid of flying and he likes Emmy Rossum's character Laura Chapman. Apparently he doesn't really get along with his father because he's away all the time, but those feelings are tossed out the window almost immediately, so it's hardly worth mentioning. The scene can be summed up as,
pick up your son and take him to the airport.
Alright. Sam is still afraid of flying, right?
Right, now don't be late.
You know I will be late.
I know, but it's important that I say it so people will know you're notoriously late.
Next! This is Gomez, played by Nestor Serrano. He doesn't matter. This scene doesn't matter. Jack is running late.
Oh my god.
Yes, Jack is running late, but gets there just before Sam gets into the cab. Here we have an awkward father and son discussion about that tragic F in calculus. Sam explains his side of the story, and Jack forgets about the grade he got. Literally.
How do you take it?
He flunked me, remember?
And that pretty much sums up the interaction between Sam and his father. Does it impact the story at all? Nope. Does it help build the characters throughout the film? Nope. Would it have been better if Sam just got in the cab and proven that his father is utterly unreliable? Yes. But that would have confused a later scene that is already confused to begin with. Anyway, Sam gets on the plane and the plane goes through some turbulence. Here we're introduced to Laura Chapman and Brian Parks, played by Emmy Rossum and R.J. Smith. Laura is the love interest and Brian is the nerd. Sam's fear of flying established? Check. Sam's awkward attraction to Laura established? Check. This scene serving a purpose beyond those two things? No check for you. After a bit of discussion about the buoys in the Atlantic Ocean with Ian Holm friends, we're sent back to New York where Sam, Laura, and Brian are stuck in traffic. Basically, the film drags on, hinting at the impending storm while boring us with an intellectual competition that does nothing for the film. It's simply the reason they're in New York, which gives Roland Emmerich an excuse to destroy New York. But before that can happen, Terry gives Jack a call to let him know that his prehistoric model of the Ice Age is about to come in real handy.
You recall what you said in New Delhi about how polar melting might disrupt the North Atlantic current?
Yes.
Well, I think it's happening.
Of course it is! If it weren't happening, we wouldn't have a movie, now would we? But first, Roland Emmerich needs to destroy Los Angeles.
Oh my god. Lisa, are you getting this on camera? That this tornado just came and erased the Hollywood sign.
There was some other stuff happening involving Jack and his friends getting introduced to Janet Takata, played by Tamerlan Tomita, but that doesn't really matter. What does matter is the amazing destruction of Los Angeles. While the film doesn't really bother with the science of storms, that doesn't really matter. What does matter is fuck LA and fuck pointless characters.
That bus just got dropped on top of that Porsche. Oh my god, I hope no one was in that car.
The car was clearly backing up when the bus rolled over it, dumbass. Clearly somebody was inside the car. Also, fuck reporters.
Nightmare! Only this is a real thing!
Anyway, tornadoes ravage Los Angeles for a while, characters that don't matter die, and the city is left in ruins because of man-made climate change. Damn you, fossil fuels! The film then cuts to Washington, where the vice president, played by Kenneth Welsh, is being briefed on the situation. He then informs the president, played by Perry King, that they should ground all air travel because of adverse weather conditions. What? The bad guy is making sensible decisions? Bad form, Roland, bad form. Clearly he should only care about the economy and be ignoring any advice that is given to him. Come on, he's the bad guy. You need to make him as one-dimensional as possible, remember? Then we cut back to Jack and a team of scientists discussing the situation. Jack presents his theory and is argued with because, well, just because. Honestly, this scene is just getting in the way of the destruction of the cities at this point. But I guess we need a story. In fact, the next 10 minutes of the film is just a last-ditch effort to establish a few other characters, even though none of them matter. Lucy Hall hangs out with a cute cancer kid, the nerds talk a while about nothing, and Terry comforts his worried friends about their isolation due to the weather.
Luckily we got our own Jenny. Enough tea and biscuits to sink a ship. Oh, we'll be fine.
Yeah, I'm sure they're fine. I'm sure something really stupid won't invalidate this entire statement later on in the film. Finally, we get the dumbest scene of the film, and it's one that's used as the climax as well. 3 helicopters are flying through the eye of an enormous storm system and freeze up mid-flight.
What the hell is going on?
Bloody fuel lines are starting to freeze.
The reason this scene is so dumb is because the air is so cold that it's freezing the helicopter solid, as well as the fuel in the fuel line. But the pilots are perfectly fine. I get that they're inside the helicopter and away from the elements, but the temperature is ungodly cold and yet they're fine? Well, they're fine until they open the helicopter door, that is. It is utterly ridiculous that these guys weren't already frozen inside the helicopter along with all the equipment. But that's just one idiot's opinion. It's not like the air was negative 150 degrees or something.
And what temperature does...
Negative 150 degrees Fahrenheit. We had to look it up.
Anyway, we'll get back to that nonsense in a moment. First, we need to go back to New York and see the nerds check out the rich kid's house. And of course, establish some family drama so that we have some sympathy for him. None of this really matters because they don't end up staying there, but it is a nice place. Very nice. They head back into the rain and work their way to the library because it is at higher ground. Not nearly as high as the building they were just in, apparently, but that doesn't matter. What does matter is a giant wall of water is moving into the city. Oh boy, disaster is on the way again. Not only that, but Laura injured her leg and is going to ignore it all the way through the film. I'm sure that won't have any adverse consequences, nor will a bit of dialogue later on in the film make this decision really fucking stupid. Nah, this film is all about consistency.
What is she doing?
Well, Sam, she's being stupid beyond reason. I mean, the film has established that she's very intelligent, but open wounds? Those don't matter.
Tell them to cover their eyes.
Attention les yeux!
All right, she's helping a police officer communicate with a lady and her child that are stuck inside of a cab. My bad. You know, because Laura speaks other languages because she's so damn intelligent. The police break the glass and get the trapped passengers out of the cab, but she forgets her bag inside the cab. That's okay though, Laura will go and get it for her. Now, Laura may be intelligent, but she's not very observant as she doesn't notice the giant wall of water that is rushing towards her, nor the people scrambling to get away from it. Sam notices though, and rushes in to help her. They barely escape the wall of water inside the building and are safe for the time being. And we're back with Terry and friends sitting in their little research center. This scene exists to help speed the film along and explain the climax that occurs later on in the film, and to help hammer home the idea that Terry and his assistants won't be making it out of Scotland. Now, I know we're supposed to feel sad about these characters, but to be perfectly honest, I'm only sad that we're running out of screen time with Ian Holm. Which brings us back to New York, where the film slows down for a while. The group of nerds are now trapped inside the library with a bunch of other characters that don't really matter, and it seems like Laura has completely forgotten about her wound. You'd think a puncture of the leg might give her a limp or something, but you'd be wrong. She's perfectly fine. See? Clearly nothing to worry about. Anyway, Sam gets the idea to use the payphone on the lower level that is now flooded with seawater and calls his dad. This is important because it gets the unnecessary plot rolling involving Jack and his two assistants making their way to New York to go get Sam.
Do not go outside. Just burn whatever you can to stay warm and try to wait it out. I will come for you. Do you understand me? I will come for you.
I mean, I know Jack just explained the super cooled air could freeze people to death in seconds and the overall storm is gonna get worse, but he's gotta pick up his son. I don't really understand the point of this, is Jack can't really do anything to stop the storm, won't be able to bring any extra help or supplies, and is essentially doing the opposite of his own advice. But he's survived in conditions like this before, so yeah. To be fair, this film would be considerably more boring if the people were just waiting for the storm to pass the whole time, so I guess they gotta do something, even if it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, the flooding of the lower floor ends the call between Jack and Sam, and for a brief moment we're led to believe that maybe Sam didn't make it. But he does. Of course he does. This leads Laura to help Sam find some dry clothes before Sam freezes to death. Sam strips down and Laura presses her body next to his to warm his body up with her body heat. You know, this might work a little better if this were skin-on-skin contact, as Laura's shirt is now absorbing the water that is on Sam's body, but hey, what do I know?
Where did you learn that?
Some of us were actually paying attention in health class.
Yet she didn't pay enough attention, as she hasn't even attempted to clean or bandage her open wound. But whatever. Sam is getting a bit of personal physical contact time with Laura. I sure hope that doesn't turn into a sexual harassment allegation later on in life. That would be a bummer. After their little moment, they proceed to pass out the warm blankets and clothes they found to the rest of the people in the library, and we find out that Brian knows how to fix electronics. You know, because he's a nerd.
We also found this radio, but I don't think it works.
Let me see.
Then this happens. While it is a bit ridiculous that a ship of this size managed to maneuver its way through the city, I'm willing to suspend my disbelief a little bit for the sake of a good-looking scene. The only problem with this is the ship is unmanned, so it's being propelled by the ocean itself, which has not receded back for some reason. This is important because of what happens later. We cut back to Jack briefing the president on what to do in order to reduce the casualties of this superstorm, and of course, the vice president acts like a jackass the whole time. The thing is, for a film that's running on a lot of science-based ideas, it tends to ignore actual science quite a bit. And there's also this.
Try to write it out. Pray.
Science! 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 And prayer. Now, I get that science and religion can run together, but it's still a little bit silly that his advice involves a whole bunch of people talking to God in the same breath that he's saying if his science had been listened to and they had acted sooner, this could have all been avoided. Anyway, Jack needs to get back to ignoring his own advice and heading to New York to, save his son? It's probably more accurate to say that he's got to head to New York to trap himself and his assistants in New York with his son, but we won't get bogged down in those kinds of details. We've got a pointless plot to get to. But first, we need to get back to Scotland to have one last scene with Ian Holm.
Sorry, mates, but we're just about out of petrol.
Damn you, fossil fuels! You have doomed mankind to the fastest ice age in history, and you've also doomed Ian Holm because he didn't stock up enough fuel. Which is interesting, because earlier on in the film, he had mentioned they had enough tea and biscuits to sink a ship, but not enough fuel to run the generator. Priorities, Terry. You suck at them. The film cuts back to New York, where Luther the Bum, played by Glenn Plummer, notices that people are out walking on the now frozen ocean water. So let me get this straight. It's cold enough outside to freeze flowing ocean water in a matter of days, but not cold enough to freeze the people walking on the water. You would think that if it were that cold, the exposure, regardless of clothing, would be dropping these people in no time, but nope. This inspires the cop of the group, played by Philip Jarrett, to gather as many of the group as possible to leave the safety of the library library to wander the frozen wasteland of New York. Sam argues against this, but is mostly ignored. This thins out the group inside the library to a manageable level though, so I honestly don't care. Everybody seems to be ignoring the science of the situation, including the filmmaker himself, so fuck 'em. Cut back to Jack, Frank, and Jason getting ready to head out into the elements themselves, and you know what? Fuck them too. Back at the library, we're shown that it has a fireplace, which allows the group to burn the furniture to keep warm. Oh right, they're gonna be burning books, and the film is gonna make a big deal out of this because, I don't know, all the books in the world are in this one library. I mean, yeah, they got wooden chairs and desks, but yeah, let's start with the books. We're brought back to the hospital with Dr. Lucy Hall taking care of cute cancer kid, and we find out that no ambulance is coming to pick them up, which makes sense. Given all the chaos, they're probably too busy helping others or have fled south to avoid the storm. One cute cancer kid is not worth the risk, honestly. However, Lucy is gonna stay behind because, well, she's a decent human being. Back at the library, we've got the fire going, and Brian explains to Sam that the storm is everywhere, which they already knew from the news, but it's important to remind the audience that there's more going on besides these people in a library. Brian also explains that he doesn't think Sam's dad is going to make it, and with good reason. Sam should also have his doubts because it has been established that his dad is an unreliable twat, but
he'll make it.
Consistency! Roland's biggest weakness. Jack is on his way with Frank driving and Jason sitting in back. Now, most people would know to take it slow in adverse conditions because they might lose control of the vehicle, but Frank doesn't care about all that and crashes the rig. This forces the three to venture out the rest of the way on foot. The film continues to slow down with a scene of Luther explaining to the rich kid how the homeless have learned to survive on the streets in adverse conditions, and Sam and Laura discuss some memories. None of it really matters, and as an audience member looking for destruction, this film is failing at bringing the action. Then we're back to Jack and company trekking through the snow over a glass shopping mall, which ends up breaking due to the weight of the sled and dragging Frank down with it. He immediately cuts the sled to reduce the weight, but because, I don't know, Frank is a fat fuck, the glass above him holding Jason begins to crack. You'd think the weight of the sled would be the thing that gets the glass to start cracking, but nope, it only starts cracking after Frank cuts it loose. To save Jason and Jack, Frank cuts himself loose and dies in the mall. If this scene made any sense, I'd give a shit that Frank was dead, but it doesn't, so I don't care. One less character to have to think about. Back at the library, one of the librarians talks about the importance of books. This is more padding where there could have been destruction. Oh, and the ambulance arrives to the hospital to pick up Lucy and the cute cancer kid. Oh, and Laura and Sam kiss. This film has more padding than Luther's paper-filled coat. As the film winds down towards the end, Laura succumbs to her opened wound, which forces Sam and his nerd friends to head out to the convenient ship to search for antibiotics, which they find without much trouble. But since this film has been mostly boring for the past 45 minutes, they decide to throw in some wolves that escape from the zoo at the beginning of the film to chase down our nerdy heroes. On top of that, the Eye of the Storm has reached their point in New York at the same time that Jack has arrived in the area. This forces both the nerds and the would-be rescuers to literally run from the air. And this was brilliantly parodied by South Park.
It's coming! Here comes global warming! We did it, lizard!
Luckily, Jack is able to get Jason and himself inside a building and staves off the super-cooled air with gas burners. Meanwhile, Sam and the nerds outrun the frozen air and manage to keep the room from freezing over with their rapid book burning. All of this is really ridiculous, but the film is almost over, so I don't really care.
We're getting scattered reports that the storm is dissipating over North America. Can you confirm?
And as quickly as the storm came, it ended. Lucky day indeed. Jack reaches Sam, Sam is happy to see him, and everyone learns their lesson about the importance of being environmentally conscious. Oh, and Mexico is awesome, apparently. Anyway, that was the day after tomorrow, and I hate this movie. For a disaster film, it blows its destructive load way too early and then prattles along with a bunch of pointless side plots and character padding. It's also incredibly preachy about its message of being environmentally conscious, using science as the backbone for their ridiculous disaster. This wouldn't bother me if the film paid any attention to science throughout the film, but it didn't. It threw out science to get the film going while preaching that we should listen to science to avoid such a catastrophe. While I'd say their heart was in the right place, their brains were nowhere to be found. For a disaster film, it's almost an hour too long with pointless plot threads involving pointless characters that achieve pretty much nothing. The lack of consistency distracts from the message of the film, and the boring second half completely ruins the destruction of the first. The film did have some good qualities. The soundtrack is enjoyable, and the effects were mostly good. It was great to see Los Angeles get destroyed, and the wall of water that hits New York is pretty cool. But beyond that, there's not much to be had here. The performances were all over the place, the story was all over the place, and the characters were mostly boring. As far as disaster films go, this one is less than average. And for a film with a clear agenda written in, it was even less than that. On a 10 scale, I give this film 4 out of 10. It's an utter failure. But I'm just an idiot, and this has been a movie, so it's clearly fiction, but some people consider it to be science fiction. Unfortunately, the sheer lack of science involved, to me, makes it just fiction. Poorly thought out fiction.